everyone, Emily here. Just a reminder, just a refresher, I am a licensed mental health therapist, been here in the field for around 6 years. I am joined again with Gary Schafer, the author of A Family Story of Addiction, Death, and Recovery. Today we are joined by a wonderful friend of mine, Rachel. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, like she said, my name's Rachel, Rachel Blanchette. I am a licensed marriage and family therapist, which means I just specialize in family systems. I do see mostly individuals because we are each impacted by the systems we are a part of. And so, yeah, that's kind of my background. I've been practicing since 2019, and I work at the same office that Emily does, seeing clients, and I do some recovery work with individuals in recovery. And yeah, we're just gonna talk about grief.
Yeah. So like Rachel said, we're gonna talk about some grief today and what it looks like, who it affects, what kind of steps we can take to work through it. So Rachel, kind of help us out. What would you say grief is?
Grief is, this is how I define it for my clients, is that grief is the love we didn't get to feel when the person was alive. And so everybody who's lost a person, whether it is through death or even through addiction where they're not the same person anymore, that is the amount of love that we had for that person that we didn't get a chance to give, because everybody that we have love for in our lives, we have all of this love built up in us to give to that person. And the grief that we have is just kind of the opposite feeling, that sorrow that comes from not getting to express that love. And so I kind of see it as the love we didn't get to share.
I love that perspective.
Yes.
Yeah.
That is very good.
Yeah.
I've never heard that. And
Yeah.
it really is, because you feel you've lost something that you weren't able to give.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Okay. So would you consider there to be differences between, the way a male grieves versus the way a female grieves?
Oh, 100%. Especially because society has conditioned us to treat our emotions differently. Because men, unfortunately, have been conditioned to believe that sadness is a weakness or crying is a weakness, and that for most men, they tend to express feelings in anger or frustration because that's socially acceptable. Not because that's what they really truly believe about a situation, but that's because that's what they've been told, is it's only okay to share your feelings if you're punching a wall or if you're angry and yelling and screaming. And that's not true. Obviously, we all have those emotions. And I think too, we're kind of taught that strength is a big trait for people, especially men, when in terms of loss, that like, oh, they're so strong, they're not even crying. And it's like, well, they still have those feelings and those emotions, they're just not feeling able to let them out, or that it's safe to let them out. And I think women have been much more privileged in that scenario to express their emotions fully, to break down and cry when they feel that they need to express those feelings. I don't think that men have been afforded the same opportunity in our society. And so I really do think that impacts long-term how men and women grieve, because we're taught what's allowed and what's not.
Interesting. I know for me, when Eric was alive, going through his addiction years, I did punch a few things. I did show anger.
And that's normal too.
Yes, but after recovery for myself and understanding his choices of staying clean, in jail, or possibly death, I won't say I wasn't surprised, but I knew that could have been an outcome. So I can't think of the 5 stages of grief off the top of my head, but because of that previously, I think I just jumped into the oppression, that
suppressing those feelings.
Yeah.
And a lot of times that's easier, right? At least on the surface, it's easier to suppress those emotions because grief is messy. It is a messy feeling. It's complicated. And oftentimes it's hard to explain to somebody who hasn't experienced grief of their own. And a lot of people are uncomfortable with grief. They might put those feelings at arm's distance, because people don't know what to say. They don't know how to react to your grief. They don't know how to comfort you, when in reality, you don't know how to comfort you either. You're going through it too. You just need someone to say, hey, I'm here. Hey, yeah. I understand. This sucks. This is awful. This shouldn't have happened to you. I'm so sorry. Saying those things is comforting, but people don't know how to deal with those feelings because
it's uncomfortable.
It's uncomfortable. It really is. And people often in therapy every day apologize for crying in therapy. And I tell them, if you can't cry here, where can you cry? Where can you express those feelings? Right. This is the safest place to do that. And so we're even conditioned, no matter who we're sitting in front of, to close off. Yeah, put the mask on, close off those feelings. Don't show them because they're uncomfortable for others to deal with. And that's just not true.
I will say after Eric's death that, and a therapist, I don't know if it's right or wrong, that we went to go see said he died. He didn't pass. So yeah, that's why I use the word died, death. Okay. And myself, my wife Marlene, our daughter Rachel, and our son Keith, we talked about him afterwards to make people feel comfortable about it. In fact, within probably 4 months after he died, on his birthday, we had the family over and a friend who knew Eric. And we watched a movie that he loved, and we had pizza, his favorite, and apple pie, and we just talked about him. And this was probably 4 or 5 months afterwards. So I think when you throw yourself into there and let let yourself grieve, it helps you heal. We were told you can't go under, around, or above grief. You got to walk on through it.
And I love other culture, like, I don't know if everyone I'm sure has seen the Disney movie Coco, but I borrow from that culture a lot with an ofrenda in my house of pictures of loved ones that have died, because I really love the belief that they have in that culture that we keep those people alive, or we keep their spirit alive in the spirit world by talking about them, by having their picture up in our home, by making their favorite foods, by doing those things. And I love getting to see those people's faces on my, I have a little table in my home that has all these photos of all the people that have gone, that have died, some very much too soon, and some, at the natural conclusion of their life. And I love that culture, and I wish that we kind of had a similar thing, but it's a very interesting dynamic of the way they talk about their deceased loved ones, that it's seen as they're not gone. We know exactly where they are. We haven't lost them. We know where they're at. Yeah. They're in this other realm, or this other spirit, or heaven, or whatever your beliefs are, is that they're in heaven. We know where they're at. We miss them. And this is how we keep them alive. And so I really love that, doing that celebration for his birthday, because I think it does keep their spirit alive. Energy is not created nor destroyed. It just goes elsewhere.
Yeah, it is interesting because in that support group I told you about for people who have lost a loved one, overdose, and someone asked, what do I do on their anniversary of their death or their birthday? And so I shared, and we used to get together on the anniversary of his death, and we'd just hang out, have a meal, and we used to release balloons outside, but they said you shouldn't do that anymore.
Yeah, now it's not so great for the environment, but yes.
But so now we blow bubbles. And
that's awesome.
We do it on his birthday, and we have a meal, and we listen to the music. He was a big Beatle fan, so we listen to Beatle music, and so we actually get together and we do things, and that's how we celebrate his life.
Absolutely.
And back to your point, we have a section on the wall which has pictures of him, and we were blessed that a therapist knew an artist who lost her son, and she does landscape from their clothing. So we gave her a bunch of Eric's clothing, and she did this special artwork.
I saw that in your book.
Yes, where he was in Florida and where he lived. So it was just amazing.
That's so special.
Yeah.
It's a great way to keep his memory alive, because the reality is that grief is our own, and it's just as personal to each person. It's your own. And so if that makes you feel closer to him, then it's the right thing to do. Because some people find it to be too painful, or they want to be alone on a special day, or I personally, I don't know that I fully remember the exact date my own mother passed, because I try to keep her alive in other ways and not thinking about that day for me. And that's
Right.
what works for me, you know,
Right.
and I celebrate her life in other ways at other times. And so it's really unique to the person. There is no one right way to honor an anniversary of their death, or an angel day, as some people call it, or
Right.
a birthday, or a Mother's Day, Father's Day, anything like that. There is no one right or wrong way to do it.
Yeah, I agree.
Mhm.
I agree with everything. How would you say that grief affects other relationships outside of that individual who had passed?
So with relationships, what I see often as a couples therapist is couples grieving differently. And that and I'm sure you, in your support group, you've heard a lot of couples who end up divorcing, or they
Oh, yeah.
don't grieve on the same timeline. And that's because we don't love the same way. And I want to be clear, I'm not saying that one person might love the child more, or the person more than the other. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that we love differently. And just as unique as the love we have and the relationships we have, because I'm sure, you know, you and all the members of your family had very different relationships with your son.
Yes, yes.
And so, of course, your grief is going to look different too. And so I think we have to have some awareness for that our grief is going to look vastly different. And also, societally, what does grief look like? What's socially acceptable for grief? How can we show that? What do we feel comfortable with? What did our family of origin show us as normal for grief? You know, all of those things. And so I really do think that we have to honor that difference, and that we have to be able to express that the differences that we see don't mean a different love for that person. Because often, especially in couples and marriages, we see people extrapolating that, well, you're not breaking down and crying every day, therefore you didn't love this person as much as I did. Or how can you forget this person? Or how can you do, you know, when in reality, they might be thinking, I know I have to go to work to provide for my family. If I cry every day, I won't be able to do my job. Or I was taught that I wasn't allowed to cry as a child, or whatever the case might be. And so having that open dialogue, having their own therapy, but also couples marriage counseling can be helpful in that scenario, especially because grief, again, like love looks different for everybody, grief looks different for everybody. It's as unique as us.
And I think back to your point, it's difference between the father and the mother, which can be, I can see the father at some point saying to the mother, we gotta get over this. We have to move on, more than the mother saying that to the father. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And especially because we also have to look at what society tells us about parenthood, that for many women, motherhood is a sense of identity. And not that fatherhood isn't, because you're obviously a very involved father, you love your children very much, but in a lot of ways, being a mother is who we are and who society sees us as. And so that can be an identity shift, frankly, when a child passes. And especially if it was an only child, you know, am I still a mother? Do I identify as such? Whereas a male might not have that same experience, where they're dealing with a literal identity crisis of, who am I now? Do I get to claim myself as a father? That's not as much maybe at their core as it is for women.
Okay.
And so of course that's going to differ in that scenario. But I think, like you said, it can look differently. And that man, what he might be trying to say is, this is very painful for me and I don't know how to handle it. And so I want to move forward. I want to create this new life. But what the mom might be hearing is, we have to forget about him. And that's not at all what's being said.
No, that's
no,
that is not what's being said.
Of course not.
Right.
But that's what's being heard, which are two different things.
One thing I read in a book, it was The Worst Loss, the death of a child. And she brought up something I was not aware of. The siblings, maybe the one who has died has probably shared more with the siblings than they had with their parents.
Well,
And sometimes the parents get all the grief from people, but they forget about the siblings. And that's where I think it's so important that the parents have to, although you're grieving, you got to stay connected to the rest of your family.
Yeah.
I think you can do both at the same time. You can grieve, but still give yourself to your kids as a father or a mother.
absolutely. And realistically, our siblings are our longest relationships we have in life. When we're born, our parents have lived a whole lifetime without us, right? You know,
Yeah.
our parents have had a whole life before we came along. And, you know, God willing, we will outlive our parents, and our parents will pass away when we're adults, and we will live a good chunk of our life afterwards without our parents. Siblings are really the only relationships in life where you are born together around the same time frame, and God willing, you'll die around the same time frame at the natural end of your life.
That's true.
And so that is a unique relationship where you know somebody through all the stages of their life. I can only imagine what my parents were like when they were young, whereas siblings have that memory of what their sibling was like as a child, what their sibling was like in adolescence, adulthood, and into old age. And when that's cut short, that's also a loss of what should have been, right? You know, that, and like you said, that connection of relationships. And I'm an only child, so I don't necessarily know that relationship, but what I know about that relationship is that it is a very deep connection, because like you said, they might be telling each other things that the parents never knew.
We'll never know.
That we'll never know, right?
We'll
and
never-
that's a beautiful thing.
And we don't want to know.
No, absolutely not. And that's a wonderful thing, because that creates that camaraderie also, because they're the only ones that know what it's like to have you guys as parents. They're the only ones with that shared experience of the same mom and dad living in the same household. And they can really sometimes commiserate, I'm sure, of you know, of rules and things in the home, but also, you know, they can understand what everybody's going through together. And so it's a friendship, but it's much more deep than that, because it's really for your entire lifespan.
You will see them fight, but when you see one of them getting hurt from elsewhere, they bond.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's so funny watching. My husband has several siblings, and watching, it's like he can poke fun at his brother, but if somebody else does, man, he's coming for you. You know, and that's a bond that's undeniable. And so that grief, like you said, gets ignored sometimes, and not intentionally, of course, but it gets maybe glossed over because of the immense grief that a parent experiences. But we don't often think about, well, what about these siblings who were supposed to have their whole lifespan with this individual cut short?
And that could also be for the spouse too.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're grieving so much that connection with your spouse is diminished, that puts a strain.
Absolutely.
What was that like for you, Gary, with your grief? Did that affect you and Marlene's, your guys' relationship?
It, because, like I said, back to my previous point, because we knew what addiction was like and it could happen, but still, when they die suddenly, that is another impact, I think, too, which changes the grieving process. I won't say we really went through a lot of issues between the two of us. I do know, for me, I could go back into certain things and it didn't bother me. For Marlene, it didn't. For an example, I found this place to have dinner or breakfast, and I said, hey Marlene, I got this great place. So as I drove there and I went into the parking lot, she says, no way, because next door was Jams, and that's the place where they do urine tests for people who are court ordered, and she goes, I can't. So I had to leave the lot. There's other things. Eric was a chef, and there's a fruit and vegetable and meat store that Eric, it was like a candy shop for him, right? And he liked to go in there, and for a long period of time, she could not go in that store. For me, I could go back in. So that was the difference of what she was willing to do and bring back memories of him compared to me.
And I think the key difference that you're saying but not saying is
Yeah.
that you celebrated that, or you honored those differences, understanding that one wasn't right, one wasn't wrong.
Right.
They were just different.
Yeah.
So you had those differences and you called out those differences, but you also respected and recognized that within each other, that it's okay that she couldn't go into that
No, correct,
restaurant
yeah.
because of how it was making her feel. And you may have felt closer to him going into that shop of the fruits and the things
Yeah,
that, you know,
yeah.
you felt close to him and you felt his presence, whereas to her it would be just far too painful.
Yeah.
And that's okay. We all experience those things very differently in our grief. And so that's where I think couples can either grow close together in their grief and feel supported by one another, or they can grow separate, because then we feel shame, we feel all kinds of negative emotions about ourselves if we're not being supported by our partner in our grief. If someone's saying, well, it's not normal that you can't go into that store, or I can't believe you won't go to dinner with me at
Right,
this restaurant
right.
just because of what's next door. You know, if somebody is criticizing that grief, that's when couples tend to start.
Because they're not paying attention to that person's grief at that time.
Yeah, and they're not hearing the other person say, this is how I feel about this. And just because you lost the same person doesn't mean your grief is the same. It's going to be very different.
Right.
And so honoring and respecting that is key.
I think with addiction too, because it's so sudden and what you've went through, is there guilt? Is there, you know, because
Absolutely.
could I have changed things? And I tell people, you can what if yourself to death. I mean, you did what you thought you could do. And we have, as saying in a support group, we didn't cause it, we can't control it, we can't cure it. And I had to put that in my mind that I did the best I could for what I knew. And I'm sure a lot of people still struggle with, if we didn't do this, or if we did that, he or she would still be here. So I think that might, yeah.
Hindsight is always 20/20. Hindsight is one of our best and our worst things that we have in our mindset, because we often look back and say, well, if I had just done this one thing, I could have prevented this, or if I had just made this one intervention, or if I had just, you know, called this one resource, we would have been okay. But the reality is that we don't know. We don't know.
We don't know what path it would have went down.
Right. And the other reality is that there's a lot of stigma still around addiction in our society. There's a lot of shame and a lot of guilt and a lot of negative things around substance use disorder, that people are still thinking of it as a choice, or thinking not of it as a disease. You know, it is a disease, it is a disorder, and it's not something that even the person that's utilizing the drugs has control over. And so it feels very out of control. And it's hard when society kind of shames that, especially in your grief, to understand, you know, how people might shy away from providing comfort and support to
because
you.
Of the manner of death.
Right, and the same thing goes with suicide, and it's a pretty similar experience, I think, in terms of the shame involved with it, that a lot of people don't want to talk about the disease. They don't want to talk about the individual, you know, whereas that kind of is what cures your heart a little bit, I'm sure, is getting to talk about him and keeping him alive in your heart.
Right.
Keeping him there makes you feel so much closer to him. But other people might go, taboo, I can't talk about him, we can't talk about how he died, we can't talk about this, when in reality that's what helps us not only keep our loved one alive, but also maybe prevent someone else from making those same choices, you know, in life, to help them see.
So
Hello, this is Gary. I'm following up on a comment that Rachel made, how a certain culture displays pictures of their loved ones who have died, and that's a way for them to remember them. Well, this is a little section of the wall we have for Eric. Top left is a teddy bear made from Eric's shirts, and an angel that was sent to us by a very dear friend. The candle is inscribed, "All you need is love, Eric Michael." Eric being a big Beatle fan, that's what we engraved on it. And we use that for special events like his birthday or Christmas and that type of deal. We light it, and that's Eric being with us on those days. His diploma from college from culinary arts. In lower left is the picture we had an artist made for us. It's not a painting. This is actually made from Eric's clothing. She knows how to rip up their clothing, and she actually glues them on a canvas to create this picture. And that's actually where Eric lived on the Atlantic Ocean for a period of time. And that table, the blue and white spirals, we used to sit there and talk. Over on the lower right is a medal that Eric won at a culinary competition, and his favorite knife, which is engraved with his name. So this is the wall we remember Eric by.